Welcome to the View from the Inside podcast. Follow along as former college inside linebacker turned certified financial planner professional, Kevin Richardson, gives you a view from the inside of the financial world so you can make a great game plan for yourself and your family. By featuring first-hand experiences, this show is committed to being your new go-to financial advice outlet with a splash of sports, current events, and captivating guest interviews. Now, onto the show.
Hello and welcome to the View from the Inside podcast with your host, Kevin Richardson. Kevin, your number one episode. Welcome to podcasting. How are you? Are you excited about this?
Yeah, Bill, I am fired up, and I want to thank you. I want to thank Disha. I want to thank everybody at Proudmouth. You guys have a great thing going. Excited to tell the story of tactical wealth management in the first couple pods, and then with any luck, hoping to introduce to the listeners some really good guests along the way and stay kind of current with our topics around the financial world.
So why don't we just start this whole thing with a little background on you? Because I find that that's the best way to go with these kinds of things. I realize you have clients who may know a little bit about you, but not everything about you. So let's go all the way back. Let's go to the origins, if you will. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, that's fun to talk about. I grew up in the Central Valley of California, little town outside of Bakersfield, Shafter. About 10,000 people. Dad was a school teacher, had a master's degree in industrial arts. So he taught auto shop, metal shop, wood shop, and technical drawing. And to this day, he's that guy that can do numbers in his head like nobody's business. Maybe that's why I ended up in financial services. My mom was a registered nurse, had an older brother, Mark. He was 4 years older than me. He was a great athlete, great student. I totaled it up the other day as I was kind of thinking about him. He had 5 varsity letters in 5 different sports: football, basketball, track, baseball, and tennis. He went to UC Berkeley on a track scholarship. He was a javelin thrower, was a high school coach and teacher, then got his doctorate in education and ultimately was a superintendent. Mark unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, and I've always heard people say when they lose somebody, you think of them every day. That's definitely the case. I now believe those people. I think of Mark all the time. But, great family, obviously teachers and people that were built around helping. And I think that maybe kind of shows through in what we do at Tactical Wealth. The other part about where I grew up, it's interesting to think about that time in the 70s where interest rates are going higher and inflation is kicking in. And you don't realize that as you're a kid growing up, but I was always fascinated with the local economy. It was built around farming, and a lot of guys were going out of business. The higher interest rates were taking them out of business. And I was always fascinated with how do you earn? And I remember I rounded up the family lawnmower and I was mowing 4 lawns a week at $5 each. So I'm making $20 a week in like 4th, 5th, 6th grade.
Big money for that, ain't you?
Yeah. And you learn that you can't scale, right? There's only one lawnmower. There's only one guy to push the lawnmower, but I saved that money. And then through my travels throughout the neighborhood and hanging out with my friends in Shafter, you didn't have a laundry room. You had a washer and dryer in the garage. And so when you were at your buddy's house, you'd go past the washing machine, and every house had Clorox right next to the washing machine. Rich kids, poor kids, middle-class kids. And I remember thinking to myself, if I could invest in Clorox, if I could own that company, how cool would that be? You'd make all kinds of money. Well, lo and behold, my uncle Monty Reedy becomes a stockbroker for Dean Witter. By the way, they were owned by Sears, the department store back then.
Right.
And I know one of the things he would do, they would put them down at the Sears next to the Kenmore washer and dryer. I guess they figured high net worth people were buying Kenmore washer and dryers for whatever reason. We'll talk more about how we find clients in this business in future pods, obviously. But I bought my first stock when I was in 7th grade. I took that lawn mowing money and invested into Clorox. And so that's kind of my fun finance story. How did you first start realizing what the markets were about?
Oh, that is great. I see here I was all ready. You said Bakersfield. I was all ready to go to country music. And if you knew Buck Owens and everything else. So you told us what you did for work, how you earn money, but what'd you do for fun growing up?
That one's simple. One word, sports. Played sports all the time and practice sports all the time. That was kind of a theme for me as an athlete. Just do it, and do it again. And I had this best friend, Scott Peterson, and I hope everybody has a best friend like Scott Peterson. It's that first guy that you have memory of that's outside of your family. And Scott lived 4 doors down. He was 1 year older than me. He was a phenomenal athlete. But if we saw it on TV, we'd go play it. If basketball's on, we'd go play basketball. Football was on, we'd go play football. We had this thing at Christmas. He and I would both get a new basketball at Christmas, and the driveway that we played in was kind of rough. And we realized at Christmas when we got this new basketball, if we played all day, by the end of the day, the black lines on the basketball were gone. So like Christmas after Christmas, how many free throws can a guy shoot on Christmas Day? But Scott was a great friend. He and I both love sports, and it was just that thing where we said, we kind of had this agreement, let's be great at school. Let's go get straight A's, and then nobody can take sports away from us. And as hard as we play, because we play to win, we're probably going to go through some things when we're playing sports, but no one can take that away from us because, hey, they're great students. Let them go do their thing. And we get into high school, and Scott earns 10 varsity letters, 2 in football, 4 in basketball, 4 in track. He's that guy that could dunk a basketball as a freshman in high school, through the shot put 52 feet, through the discus 170 feet. Well, when he was a senior, he got recruited by everybody to play football. And when I say everybody, it was everybody in California: USC, UCLA, Cal, Stanford.
Wow.
Everybody came to see Scott. Scott was Mormon, so ultimately he ended up going to BYU to play football. And if you're a football fan and you want to Google this, you can jump on the internet and Google September 1985, the Sports Illustrated college football and pro football issue. On the cover is Eric Dickerson of the Rams and Napoleon McCollum from Navy. He was a running back. But in there is a feature article on Scott Peterson taking his Mormon mission after playing 1 year at BYU. So a little sidebar there if you're
That's cool.
into that.
That's great.
Yeah, pretty neat stuff. So here I come, a year behind Scott. He and I are winning a lot of games, and of course you got to compete. I got to one-up him, and I end up getting 11 varsity letters, 3 in football, started both ways for 3 years, 4 in basketball, 4 in track. My senior year in track, I threw the discus 197 feet 6 inches, which was actually the number 2 throw in the nation that year. I was a high school All-American, if you will, in track and field. And I was lucky enough. Scott brought the recruiters in a year before. They came back, and I wanted to go to UCLA. They recruited me, and we'll talk a lot about life lessons in this podcast and in future podcasts. And I think I learned probably my first real life lesson, if you will. UCLA recruited me, never offered me, and I was so upset. And I thought, boy, I've done all the work that I need to do. It seems like that should have happened, and it didn't happen. So life lesson, sometimes, even if you do everything you're supposed to do, you maybe don't get what you want. But more importantly, along comes Stanford University. They offer me a scholarship to come and play football. And literally the Stanford thing, I can't think of something that was a better thing for me. So sometimes you don't always get what you want, but sometimes I guess the life lesson would be the alternative ends up being a better solution for you.
Yeah, Stanford, that's not too shabby a school. I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, it worked out all right.
It sounds like, well, first of all, I have a son-in-law who went to Berkeley, so there's a little bit of a rivalry in me already with you.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it sounds like Stanford was a great place for you.
It was amazing. And in a real interesting way, because academically, I realized, boom, right away, these kids that I'm sitting in class with, they studied to come here as a student the same way I worked out to come here as an athlete. So they were bringing the A game. So to say things came easy academically would be wrong. It was super hard. But I learned so much about that process because in high school, it all came so easy academically. And then from a football standpoint, it was so much fun, but in such a different way, in that the bar was raised. It was so much harder to find your way onto the field. So as a true freshman, I redshirt like you do. You work out with the team. You just don't play in the games. 1985, I'm a freshman. I play a little bit. And in the spring of 1986, in spring football, a life lesson and kind of the way that I came up with the name of this podcast. I had this thing that happened that was probably invisible to everybody around me, but really impacted me and influenced the way I do things. So we're at a meeting before spring practice watching film. And by the way, if you're a high school kid listening to this, or a parent that's got a high school kid and, oh, my kid wants to go play college sports, understand for every hour on the field, you're probably doing 3 hours of film study and playbook work, right? So it's a lot of work off the field. And we're in this meeting. I get asked this question and I answer the question. And the answer isn't great. It's enough to not get yelled at by the coach, but it's not enough to inspire confidence. And I walk out of that meeting, got on my gear, I'm going to practice, and I was so upset with myself. I was thinking to myself, look, you've been given this gift. You're in the classroom with some of the greatest students in the world. And what have you learned from these guys? You've learned from those guys that if you can master the curriculum, then master it. Don't mess around. Know it and be great at it. And I'm thinking about this playbook, and I'm thinking about how easy the playbook is relative to stuff we're doing academically. And I told myself, never let that happen to you again, where you kind of have a half answer along the way. You're a linebacker, you're an inside linebacker, you're the quarterback of the defense, so you need to know everything. So I went to work on the playbook, and things fell together for me. In the fall, we went to the Gator Bowl. I started 3 games that year, ended up starting 25 games as an inside linebacker over the next few years. Had 289 tackles. So proud of that accomplishment. And I'll point out, when we went to the Gator Bowl, that was in the old days where you only had like 30 bowl games, not 60 like you do today. But you know, that view from the inside, like knowing what you need to know and the stuff that you can master, get in there and master it. And I feel like at Tactical Wealth, we work really hard at that, knowing what are the fees, what kind of manager we're buying you in a mutual fund. How does all of this come together? We can't know a market, but we can know everything around that. And again, that view from the inside, I always try to bring that and that life lesson that I learned at Stanford, that, hey, don't let things float that you can really grab and handle. And I hope that comes out when we manage money and help people with their financial life.
Yeah. So after college, after Stanford, did you go right into the finance industry? Was that the course?
Well, so, you know, before I left Stanford, there were a couple of things that kind of bumped me along the way, if you will. So I'm in my 4th year at Stanford, and I'm in the training room, which is where you go to get your ankles taped before you go to practice, right? And I look over in the corner, and there's this volleyball player. She's got her foot in a bucket of ice, right? She's twisted her ankle. So I roll over and strike up this conversation. This is Teresa Smith, who is now Teresa Richardson, by the way, my wife. But she's a volleyball player at Stanford, and we get to talk and become friends. And she mentioned that they have a volleyball game and you ought to come watch us play. So I go over with a couple of my buddies to go watch this volleyball game. And at the time, and I think right now too, Stanford's a top 10 volleyball program. At the time, they were top 5, maybe even number 1 in the country. They've got 3 All-Americans on the team. Teresa is one of those All-Americans. And no offense to the kids I went to school with at Shafter High School, the girls that played volleyball there, but the volleyball in high school versus this volleyball
very
is
different.
zero comparison, right? And so Teresa's out there. She's an outside hitter. She's just hitting that ball, scoring points, doing her thing. A couple days later, we go to dinner. And of course, learning this thing that I'd learned a few years earlier about really understand what you're doing, I'm so excited to talk to this All-American volleyball player about how she approaches volleyball.
Yeah.
And so I asked this question. I can't wait to get into it with her. And I'm like, when those blocks go up and they give you a set and you're going to hit that ball, it seems to me it's all about brute force. You're just trying to just tear their head off and get that ball to go down. And she laughs and she said, well, I'm glad that's what you think was going on. But she said, the reality is I'm looking for the soft spot in the set, or in the block, rather. She's like, if their hands are apart, I'm trying to just put that ball in the gap. Take the easy route to get the point. That's what I'm trying to do. She said, now, if the block is perfect, yeah, I want them to feel like the ball's coming right for their head. And what I'm really trying to do is ricochet that ball off their arms and have it go out of bounds so I get the point. But she said, don't forget, right, in sports and in life, take the easy shot if you know it's going to be a kill shot. And instantly, I was like, you just made me a better football player, because every football coach that you deal with will say, you're going to get the ball carrier, you have to knock down that blocker, and then you go make the tackle. Well, if I think about a guy like Dave Wyman, that was an All-American, that was a second-round draft pick for the Seahawks, and I sat behind him for quite a few years, he was so fast that he'd get to the ball carrier before the blocker got anywhere near him, right? And it hit all of a sudden. It's like, you don't have to be so methodical. If the easy shot is there, take that easy shot, especially if it's going to lead to the point. And I think sometimes in investing, we kind of make things a little bit too hard, if you will, right? Sometimes there's something easy that we ought to be looking at that's given us a great yield, if it's a U.S. Treasury bond or whatever the case may be. But anyhow, a great thing to meet Teresa in the training room. And of course, we've been married for quite a few years, two great sons, Jack and Carl. But she's one of my sports heroes, and she made me a better football player.
Wow, that is great. Not many guys can say, I met my wife when her foot was in a bucket of ice. So, and she gave you great advice, because I happen to believe that all really good coaches, whatever the sport, really understand that what you want to exploit is not the strength. You want to exploit the weakness. You go, they are good insight on a first date. Congratulations.
Yeah. Lots of fun. Yeah. Lots of good things to come from there. That's for sure.
So after college, what came next?
Yeah, that's a great question. So year one out of college, I went to College of San Mateo, and I coached inside linebackers and special teams. Thought I might want to be a coach. I love coaching. It was fun. I'd played major college football, so I had some things that I could bring to the table from a scheme standpoint. Loved working with the student athletes. But then I realized, hey, if I'm going to coach college football, it's going to mean that you're going to have to move 10, 15 times. So I thought to myself, I probably don't want to go this route. So I fell back into my network, which is a theme with me also. A friend of mine, a guy that I got to meet when I was at Stanford, who was older than me, also a stockbroker. We'll talk about the difference between stockbrokers and financial advisors at some point too, right? But Chuck was a great guy. He's a Hall of Famer at Stanford in football. He had a couple of clients who were in the produce industry, so he introduced me to them. So I come down to the Salinas Valley, send my resume around, and I get a job working for a company called Boscovich Farms. And the guy that we worked for was a guy named Joe Boscovich, who, by the way, left the produce industry and is a money manager for Old West Investment Management, which is kind of crazy. But anyhow, Joe was the family member that oversaw sales and marketing. So these produce farming companies, you would grow your own produce, you would pack it, and then you would ship it, and you would sell it to whether it was retail or food service or a wholesaler that would sell both retail and food service. And then also brokers could get involved along the way too. So we were working in sales and marketing, and we're working for Joe. And I told you we'd talk about these life lessons, but Joe had two things that he really hammered home. One was return every phone call, which seemed very basic, but a lot of people don't do that.
No, they don't.
And, from that day forward, I've always done that. And I would challenge any client we've had here at Tactical Wealth to say, gosh, I called and I never got a call back. We do it, and we do it with regularity. The second thing he said, which was so important, was read everything. Now, remember, this is 90s, so we're pre-internet, if you will. So you can't Google and figure out what's going on. So we subscribe to these just deathly boring magazines, supermarket news and food service industry and blah, blah, blah. And we would read these magazines, and I took Joe up on it. I'm like, that is a great idea. And so it's mid-90s, and I remember Joe and I land on Walmart at the same time. And remember, in the mid-90s, when you talked about Walmart, you're thinking about motor oil, laundry detergent, and a 12-pack of underwear, right? That's what you go to Walmart for. But because we were doing this reading, we realized that they had 8 supercenters. And a supercenter is basically a Walmart with a supermarket stuck in there, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And their goal was to be the world's largest food retailer. And by the way, they are now.
They are, yeah.
So we had picked off this great idea. I dove into my network, had a friend of a friend that got me in touch with the buyer at Walmart. I make this trip to Bentonville, Arkansas. Sit down with them and, hey, you guys are going into the supermarket business. We'd like to supply produce. They're like, great news. We're glad you're here and you understand what we're doing. We'd like you to be a supplier. And if you're going to be a supplier, you're going to have to participate in EDI and vendor managed inventory. And I'm like, that sounds great. And then the next question is obviously, what is EDI and what is vendor managed inventory? That was something that was very new to the produce industry because we would get on the phone and sell produce. We weren't doing the back office stuff, if you will. So they went on to explain. For them, it was electronic data interchange. They had one of the biggest mainframes in retail, which is what made them great, right? You're pre-PC for the most part. And so they said, what you do is you go home, you get yourself a PC, you'll plug into us via a digital phone line, and you'll grab our info and we'll show you the scan numbers at our stores. So we scan through a head of romaine, you'll know how much romaine each store is selling. And then at that point, you've got to translate that into romaine's got 24 heads in a carton. That'll tell you how many cartons. You figure out how many cartons on your pallets, and you tell us what needs to be on the truck and when it needs to be there. We'll send the truck in, and that'll head to our warehouse and puts it in our system. Now, we're going to go from 8 to, I think the number was 75 stores, so you're going to have to do the math to figure it out. So I head home from Bentonville, Arkansas, get home late at night, get in the morning. Produce, you start early, 6 a.m. Sales meeting. I say to the group, who likes computers? Because we only had a mainframe at the time. Well, my buddy Greg Villalobos raises his hand. Well, I kind of like him. I'm like, great, I'm buying you lunch. So at lunch, we go out to Costco. I get him the $1.50 hot dog because it's a sales budget, if you will. We go next door to the Office Depot. We get a PC. We come back to the office, hook it up to the phone line. 24 hours later, Greg Villalobos is downloading all of this code. We manually go through it. We build the spreadsheet. Heads of romaine become cartons of romaine, and then cartons become pallets, and we build this whole truckload. A lot of green onions, too. We were called the Onion King at Boscovich. That was our big label, by the way. So anyhow, we get this thing going with Walmart, and when they turned on the switch a few weeks later and went to 75 stores, instantly we had a top 3 client.
Wow.
So again, those life lessons, make sure you return every call, read everything, and that's so much more appropriate now because your research can be so detailed. But I thought that was a great lesson. And I think the other thing is pay attention to technology. We knew that the internet was coming, and a couple years into that relationship, we transitioned to the internet, upgraded the way that we interfaced and that kind of thing. But the internet, obviously, my buddy Matt Kava that also worked with us, he would always say as we were doing the Walmart stuff, that internet's going to be huge one of these days, guys. But we paid attention to what was going to go on in the internet as it related to farming. And that was
Sure.
pretty cool. And you might even kind of have that kind of moment going right now with artificial intelligence. Who knows? But some good life lessons and a great job to get out and get into the working world.
Okay, but that's in produce. And I can kind of intuit from the story you're telling how you got into finance and became a financial advisor. But how do you go from pallets of romaine to financial advisor?
That is an awesome question and kind of funny. Now, remember, I bought Clorox stock when I was in 7th grade, so I always loved.
And you're
the
still
market.
hanging on to that, I'm assuming.
Exactly. And boy, talk about one to hold during the global pandemic, that's for sure. But, we're in the late 90s. It's the tech boom. We're down here in Monterey County, just 60 miles away. My wife has always worked in tech. I had a few friends there that were working in the tech industry. And in case you haven't figured it out, I love football and I love sports. Well, I never missed a Stanford game as a tailgater in the 90s. We went to every game. And then when you worked in produce, you worked on Saturdays. You'd work like 4 hours in the morning.
Yep.
So that was a real long week. And I would go to these tailgates and I'd listen to all these stories about Silicon Valley. And a couple of friends worked at Adobe, and by the way, bought Adobe stock in 98 thinking, gosh, these people love their job. They're doing these innovative things. By the way, these computers that we're buying to do this Walmart biz, they've got Adobe software on them, right? The PDFs that we're using, and, totally made sense, just like the Clorox thing. But thought about it, and my wife, again, she weighed in. She's always the voice of reason, if you will. And she said, look, what you're working in is a family-owned and operated industry. You've probably at a point where you've outgrown it, probably time to look at doing something else. And I looked around and found my way to Merrill Lynch, went to work there in the fall of 2001, doing my training. They'd give you about 6 to 9 months to get things underway. So I'd taken my Series 7 exam, and then between my Series 7 and Series 66, we had that horrible 9/11 tragedy.
Yeah.
That was really interesting to watch inside the walls of Merrill Lynch because, they had buildings that were actually affected. Horrible tragedy. And I remember thinking when I got into the business, the market is super hot. If it will come off, that would sure help my career. But boy, I sure didn't want it to correct on the heels of something as horrible as that. But anyhow, passed my Series 66, went into production in January of 2002 for Merrill Lynch. And boy, there were some things that I learned in that 10-year journey being at Merrill Lynch that really, really jumped out at me. That's for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine so. But you're taking us halfway. So now we're out of produce. Now we're into the financial services industry. But when did you decide your calling here was to become a financial advisor, if you will?
Well, right. And that subtlety between stockbroker and financial advisor, right?
Big,
yeah.
Not so subtle, but yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess from people that aren't in the biz, right? But yeah, so a couple of things happened that really impacted me when I was at Merrill Lynch. 2005, I sat for my CFP designation, Certified Financial Planner.
Yeah.
The thing you learn there instantly is there's 5 spokes of your financial life, if you will. Investment management, which is what you lead with as a stockbroker or a Merrill advisor at the time, right? You've got money, you need it managed, bring it over, we'll charge a commission, and we'll get your portfolio set up. There's some flaws in that, and we'll talk about that. Second is estate planning. You learn that as a CFP person, and that's a thing that if you're really adding value, you need to be paying attention to that. Simple stuff like who are the beneficiaries on an account. Number 3, tax planning. Who doesn't like tax planning? Everybody bristles at paying taxes.
Oh, it's the best thing in the world, man. It's my favorite thing to do every year.
Yeah. So, you learn that, insurance planning, and then ultimately financial planning. Well, I realized when I sat for that exam that, boy, we're really just kind of scratching the surface on the first thing, which is investment planning. And it would be so much more fun to get down deep into these client relationships. So to use that old cliche, instead of being an inch deep and a mile wide. Let's be an inch wide and a mile deep. That's the thing that really started coming to me when I studied for the CFP and took that exam. Funny story on the exam too, by the way. 2-day exam at the time. I'm not sure what it is now. Second day of the CFP exam in 2005. It's on a Saturday. You mentioned Cal Berkeley. Well, that Saturday is big game, which is Cal Stanford.
Yeah.
I think they gave you 4 hours for the second test. It started 2 hours before the big game kicked off. Now, remember, I haven't missed a tailgate. So I studied so hard, going back to practice and loving sports. I'm like, I'm going to have this so dialed that I'm going to get out of here and get over to the game in time. The game was in San Jose. I had to make it to Palo Alto in time. So I was the second person out of the exam on Saturday, which was never the case for me in any exam in my entire life. But anyhow, luckily I passed the exam and I got there on time to see the game. Stanford lost, but we'll let that part go.
Oh, gee, I'm sorry, Kev.
Yeah. Second thing that happened when I was at Merrill Lynch is Merrill Lynch would encourage you to go out and get into the community, right? If my uncle Monty, when he was an advisor, they'd say, go stay by the Kenmore washing machines at Sears.
Yeah.
Merrill would say, get involved in the community, get in a nonprofit, go do something. And so for me, that was easy. I got involved at Stanford, a thing called the Buck Cardinal Club, which raises money on an annual basis for athletics. At the time, it would pay the difference between the endowment and what was owed in tuition for the student athletes. So really kind of the Switzerland of annual giving. If you loved your experience as a student athlete, which I did, then, hey, let's put some money in here and make sure this thing works. Well, at the time they were raising $3 million, 2005 when I took over. By the time I finished, we had gone to $8 million. A couple things helped me logistically. We had combined, they built a new stadium. So we had some things where you donated money for your seat location, that kind of thing. But learning how to scale that from 3 million to 8 million, learning about money coming out of produce, and then really diving in with my CFP curriculum, that was a real thing for me in terms of understanding how money flows, how people think about money, and able to do something that I really, really liked. And it also, led to a lot of business because I met a lot of people that were like, hey, I'm looking for a financial advisor. Can I talk with you and see what we can do? And then the other thing that happened, trying to get out into the community and get involved, I started broadcasting high school sports, high school football, with a couple of guys who had done it for quite a few years. Then I bought my own gear and went out and did our own high school broadcast. We got on a 10,000 watt station. We had a pregame, halftime, postgame show. The cool thing I liked about that, it was a guy named Dave Waite and I got this thing going, and we would go sell the advertising. And our goal was to send it all to the school we were working for. So it was an all volunteer broadcast crew, and we did really well for the schools. And we did what I think was a great broadcast, so much so that in 2008, I was able to get a job as the color analyst on the radio broadcast for San Jose State University.
Nice.
And I've done that for the last 16 years. This will be year 17. Last year, I was named the play-by-play voice. I'll be the play-by-play voice this fall. I've done 187 games. If you can say that you've done 200 college games, you're a pure gangster, I think, from a broadcast standpoint. But it's been super fun. First, I love football, so it's great to be around it. The other thing is, and I didn't realize this getting in, I was just trying to get involved in something.
Sure.
It's made me a better advisor because there's a couple of things that happen. You're out of town 6 weekends a year in these different communities throughout the United States, whether it's, Fort Collins, Colorado, or Albuquerque, New Mexico. And us advisors sometimes, we get that tunnel vision, and we only realize kind of what goes in our community. And so it's good to go out there and see what's going on in America and give you an idea about, what's going on with the economy. The other thing is, if I can explain the subtleties of a 42 to 35 win San Jose State over Air Force, I can probably do pretty well explaining to you how a mutual fund is different than an exchange traded fund. So that piece where you don't have the video to help you, you're trying to paint this picture, but it's been super fun. I'm so very grateful to everybody at San Jose State over the years. I've been through quite a few athletic directors and head coaches and been able to stay with that job. And it's been super fun. And one of the things we'll talk about that in future podcasts, but really a neat experience.
That is awesome, because that is a side gig that a lot of people would love to have. We're running out of time, so I'll throw this question at you for a quick response. In 2010, you became an independent financial advisor. Big step.
Yeah.
And then you started Tactical Wealth Management. What was the reason behind starting TAC?
Yeah, so it wasn't, I hit my head in 2010 and said, okay, I need to go do this. It goes all the way back to 2007. I go on a due diligence trip via Merrill Lynch down to PIMCO in Newport Beach. Bill Gross is the bond king. And in 2007, right, we're pre-global financial crisis. Bill Gross talks to the group. He says 15 things that are incredible to hear. And I remember coming back from this trip. I'm in the business 7 years. I kind of feel like I've got a meter that'll tell me like, wow, this is a time to pay attention from my old days in produce. But I come back and I remember being so concerned and talking to my friends and colleagues at Merrill Lynch and saying, here are the things that Bill Gross is saying. If 3 of these happen, we're going to have a huge correction in the market. And I remember the answer was really groupthink. Yep. And it was like, well, what are you going to do if the market goes down? You have to invest for the long run, blah, blah, blah. Bill Gross is a bond guy. He's negative. And I remember thinking at that time, wow, there's got to be a way to be more creative and more proactive on behalf of our clients.
Yep.
I'm not talking about market timing where you pull everybody out of the market, but maybe this is the time to lighten up the equity exposure. Make sure that your bonds are money good, as we like to say in the biz. So I remember in 2007 thinking, man, maybe it's time to find somewhere else where I can go and be a little more creative. Gotcha. And then the other piece goes back to this stockbroker versus financial advisor. Most of the models that you were doing at Merrill Lynch is you'd bring a client in, you'd manage their money, you'd buy stuff with a commission, and you'd put together a 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. Now we come back a couple of years later and you've got 80% stocks because the market did well.
Yeah.
Well, because it was commission based and you had to solicit the order, you would call the client and say, we need to go from 80% stocks back down to 60 to pull the risk down on your portfolio. Well, retail investors are always recency bias people. So they would say, well, stocks are going up. I don't want to sell my stocks. So a lot of the time you couldn't get the rebalance completed and you roll into something like the global financial crisis loaded up on stocks, which will go down 1 for 1 with the stock market. So I remember thinking there has to be a way to go out and be creative on behalf of your clients. And then also go from just being an investment manager to a guy that helps you with your estate plan and your tax planning and your insurance planning, and ultimately doing a financial plan that's actionable along the way. I've always loved Ray Dalio, the billionaire investor, Bridgewater. You know, that guy's a great forward thinker. And he has said many, many times over the last few years, remember, the market does some bad things on a real regular basis. And some of those things we just haven't experienced in our lifetime. So you got to study history to understand what to do on behalf of your clients.
Yeah.
And if I look at this market right now with record debt for the U.S., we've got internal conflict, we've got geopolitical conflict on a worldwide level. It feels like maybe we're on the cusp of seeing some things from the market that none of us have seen in our lifetime. So you're going to want that toolkit to be creative, if you will, and help your client kind of lean in and lean out, if you will, along the way. And that was the reason we started to chase the idea of being an independent and financial advisor. And it'll be cool jumping into the details of that on a future podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's leave it there because these are great things to pursue and pick up, particularly in the next podcast, where we'll talk a little bit about what you do at Tactical Wealth Management and what it's like to be a client there and stuff. But this is a fascinating episode, and I hate to wrap it up because it's a great conversation, but we got to find a place to stop somewhere, right? So next time we get together, we'll talk to our listeners about what it's like to be a client of yours.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. And that was a lot of fun.
Oh, no, that is a ton of fun. And for those of you who are listening to this podcast for the first time, if you're in on like the inaugural one, congratulations. But do this before you go away. Hit the follow button. That way you're a subscriber. And then you don't have to wonder, gee, I wonder how often Kevin drops his new podcast out. You're subscribed. You'll be notified and you'll know when a new edition comes out. And we'd also ask you, if you like what you hear, tell people about it. Word of mouth is a great way to promote a podcast that you find interesting, you find useful, and you find valuable, in fact. And so do so. And before we get out of here, Kevin, I just want to ask you really quickly, if people are listening who are not clients of yours who want to have a little bit of a conversation with you, reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way is to call our office, 831-717-1144, or you can hit us with an email, krichardson@Tac Wealth. But again, like that life lesson, give us a call. We'll always give you a call back. And as we always tell people, when we sit down, decide whether or not something is a fit, even if we're not the solution for you, we feel like we're posted enough to send you in a direction that's going to leave you in a better place than when you walked in the door. So we always love to sit down and kick things around that relate to your financial life.
A no-risk contact, if you will, and in fact, potentially actually very beneficial. Thanks, Kevin. We're going to run now. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. And I'd like to remind you that you can go out today and make it a great day. Do so, please. Or if you choose not, it's your choice. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the View from the Inside podcast with Kevin Richardson. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. To ask questions about topics covered during the show, head over to www.tacwealth.com. And don't forget to check the show notes for additional contact information. Kevin Richardson is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards Center for Financial Planning Incorporated owns and licenses the certification marks CFP, Certified Financial Planner, and CFP with plaque design in the United States to Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards Incorporated, which authorizes individuals who successfully complete the organization's initial and ongoing certification requirements to use the certification marks.